right. Thank you, everybody, for joining. My name is Helene Parker. I'm the host of the Programmatic Digest podcast, and today we have a very, very cool panel of guests. So we're going to give everybody a couple minutes to join, and then we'll get into today's conversation. All right. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Welcome to the very first live panel. Yay! I was looking to add some effects like of claps here and there, but I wasn't technically savvy enough, so I'm like looking into it for the next panel. But for this panel, we're going to keep it chill. We're going to talk about contextual. I have three amazing people on the panel today. Amanda Rankin, manager and data and audience strategy at Michelin. Hi, Amanda. How are you?
Hello, I'm doing well. How are you?
I am doing fantastic. And then next we have Victoria Peach, senior digital media expert. How are you doing, Victoria?
I'm great. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, I'm excited to have you as well. And then last but not least, Chris Varga, professor of advertising and analytics at the University of Colorado Boulder. How are you, Chris?
I'm fine. Nice to be here today.
Yeah, this is going to be pretty exciting. So, before we get too much into today's conversation, for just those just joining in Clubhouse fashion, welcome. I am Helene Parker. I am the Programmatic Digest podcast host, and also I am CEO and founder of Helene Parker Consulting, where we offer customizable training and programmatic media solutions. So, thank you all for joining. Today's live podcast panel is on contextual targeting and should take about 20 minutes because I know everybody's busy and we all have client deliverables in Q4. So we're gonna get into it. Amanda, how about you give us a quick introduction of yourself? Tell us a little bit about your background and then what you're excited to talk about today.
Sure. Yeah. Thank you so much for having me. Super excited to be here. So I'm Amanda Rankin. I am the data and audience manager for Michelin North America, largely leading our first, second, and third party data strategies along with our DMP, as well as leading our retailer media strategies and our in-house media buying capabilities. So lots going on there. I really enjoy my time here. Prior to that, I spent many years agency side as well. So I have a really broad base of agency and client experience across various verticals, and very excited to be here with you guys talking about the hot topic of contextual.
Yeah. Yeah, well, we're definitely going to get into that. So, Victoria, how about you introduce yourself real quick?
Yeah, so I come from predominantly an agency background working in the B2B space, so healthcare, agriculture, things like that. So predominantly agency, like I said, and I have kind of had backgrounds across programmatic as well as paid social channels. So that's kind of been my forte thus far.
That's what's up. And Chris, last but not least.
Hey, yeah. So I'm an associate professor of advertising. The two things that I specialize in teaching are programmatic advertising and analytics. So I teach communication students in advertising in undergraduate, and then in the graduate program, I teach advanced analytics. But I really have been focusing a lot lately on making my own contextual advertising solution called Social Context. So it is a pleasure to be here, and I'm happy to talk and share knowledge.
Well, you know what? How about we get right into it? And since you mentioned social context, tell us more about it. And before you get into too much details, maybe give us your definition of contextual targeting before we get to the other panelists. Chris, what is your how would we best define contextual targeting?
Contextual advertising is this idea of, appearing alongside content on the web that you have control over. Positively contextually targeting is saying, well, I want to appear alongside finance news, or I want to appear alongside sports news. That's kind of traditionally how it's been thought. of. Now, negatively contextually targeting is avoiding things, right? So it's saying I don't want to be alongside these types of content online. Social context is kind of outside. There are a lot of different ways in which kind of the landscape of contextual has been kind of conceptualized. IAB has this large taxonomy of thousands of different types of news, and GARM has also created this contextual kind of topology that you can decide where your ad appears and doesn't. Social context is kind of lives outside of that, and it's more of what are the socially good things that we can sponsor with our advertisements, and how do we find those things that match our brand. So
Gotcha.
So that's my definition of contextual. Now I'm sure Amanda and Victoria have a little bit of nuance to add to that.
I'd love. Yeah, I think it's a great point. Thank you, Chris. And the reason why I love this panel particularly because we literally have somebody in each of the programmatic ecosystem. We have Amanda on the brand side, Victoria on the agency side, and then Chris, you on the vendor side. So from an agency side, what can you tell us about contextual, and not so much a definition, but maybe how you may have implemented it?
Yeah, so having predominantly worked in the B2B space, it has been a bit of a balancing act here and there in terms of the ways that we use contextual targeting. Because we are generally working already with such small audiences to begin with, there is a bit of a fine line of becoming too niche and becoming too broad. So really what that comes down to is finding those keywords and topics that are going to allow us to reach our audiences as individuals, not necessarily as customers, as a means of making sure that we're not overshooting our shot in terms of impression generation, but we're also not, looking a weekend and have under 1,000 impressions totally generated because we've gone too far. At least that's been my exposure to it thus far.
Got you. Amanda, what's your take on that?
Yeah, no, I think from a brand perspective, and someone who's been a bit out of the weeds a bit more now that I'm on the client side, I think it's just thinking about, from a brand perspective, what sort of content do you want to align your brand with to make it the most relevant and engaging to the consumer? And that goes both on the targeting side and then the exclusion side, where you don't want to be so much. Being in the tire industry, it's a very interesting category. And sometimes you might think automotive might make sense, for example, from a contextual standpoint, but you have to think about if someone's purchasing a new vehicle, they're probably not in the market for tires. So just thinking about it from a full funnel perspective and what content makes the most sense for the consumer at each phase of the funnel.
I love that. So since you mentioned full funnel, let's talk about the strategy behind contextual advertising, contextual targeting, because I think that in the last, especially after Google announcement of Google of cookies deprecation, not Google deprecation, that would be different. So since their announcement, it seems that contextual targeting has been almost at the forefront, in addition to identity solution such as the UID 2.0 that Trade Desk led for a while. In the case of contextual targeting, during the conference that I just attended, Programmatic I/O in New York, it was a big topic in terms of a lot of advertisers and marketers are still not including contextual in their strategy. I think it's because historically contextual has not been as sexy to advertisers and brands because of how broad and general the targeting specification has been. So tell us a little bit about, especially as a brand, from a brand perspective, how have you handled maybe proposing contextual targeting, or was it even a point of discussion with the stakeholders from a brand perspective? Was it even in questions, right? Have you found that it was harder for you to implement something like a contextual advertising?
Yeah, so I'll say a couple things to that point. I think that, in programmatic and digital, things move so quickly, and there's always new advancements in technology, new targeting solutions, and brands just, quite frankly, have a hard time keeping up with a lot of that. And we tend to rely a lot on our agency partners to make those decisions for us. And like you said, typically, when you think of contextual, it's not a super conversion driving tactic especially when you compare it to something like retargeting. But I think we have to acknowledge the fact that there are a lot of advancements being made in the way of AI and things that we should be testing in preparation for the cookie apocalypse, if you will, that's upon us. So I think that as brands, we really just need to set aside a little bit of budget to really test and learn some of these new capabilities and really push our agency partners to have that mindset as well.
Great point in terms of pushing for agency partners, because I was going to ask you, Victoria, what's your point of view when from an agency perspective, what is your point of view in terms of adding contextual targeting as a strategy? And maybe to some of our listeners or viewers now, you're thinking, but whoa, I'm running contextual targeting. It's been like that for years. I'm working with, I don't know, Zeus Technology or Washington Post. The reality is that a lot of us are still not. And so I work a lot with agency partners, and a lot of the strategy that they have don't include contextual targeting. Even if I'm providing some type of training solution to them, it's still something I like to bring up, like, hey, you need to diversify your pool here. Contextual targeting is one of them. So how do you go about addressing that with your clients, but also like internally at the agency level?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, like you were saying, it is, and very similar to Amanda, there is like a bit of a hesitation I'm feeling with adding it for a lot of the reasons that she stated in terms of what it looked like, 5-10 years ago. Obviously, that's not what we're dealing with today, but we have had kind of, and I hate to use this word, an unprecedented couple of years here where, especially from the agency side, a lot of times there is a lot of uncertainty. It might not be the best year or two that you've had. Maybe you're working under kind of more stringent budgets with very clear KPIs that you're supposed to be hitting. So when you have a situation like that, you may not be as willing to test new things as you may normally, because if you know that you have like a tactic is working, and that that's going to help you hit the KPI that you need to hit, then you might be a little hesitant to add something in. Where I've seen opportunity to kind of dip our toes in is predominantly on the ad group level. I like to segment, an intent-based audience, just maybe something that's similar to what we've been doing, and add a contextually refined version of that type of audience. So that way you can see how even adding that as a layer to your targeting can impact what you're already doing, and use that as a way to kind of build a success story to eventually kind of even maybe try it from a campaign level.
Okay. I need to ask a little bit more about this. So how do you implement that? So are you saying, in addition to maybe testing third-party cookies right now, since we still have access to that, and first-party cookies and a retargeting ad group or line item, you have contextual targeting and you're utilizing certain vendors to target those audiences?
Yeah, so obviously the window of opportunity for this is closing very, very, very rapidly. But yes, essentially taking the intent-based audience and saying, okay, but within this segment, I want to see my ad showing up according to these keywords or these topics, and kind of going from there with your measurement.
Okay. And actually, it's a good question and a good segue question into what Chris mentioned earlier in terms of like not only including, but exclusion. So is contextual exclusion from a contextual perspective something we should be considering, and why? Anyone wants to answer first?
I personally think that you should start with an inclusion strategy. I think you start with the news that with programmatic advertising, there's so much scale out there, and so you don't need to think about what should I block. I think you should start with what should I positively target. Then, if you see that there's some type of content that you just want to avoid that's somehow getting through, then you exclude. But I think really good contextual targeting starts with that deliberate choice of what do I want to target? What audiences do I want to target, from a demographic standpoint? What geographics do I want to target? What psychographics do I want to target? Those are the things that you can now infer from, people just when they're on a website. I think it's really telling what people will reveal just by simply reading a news article. And I think that's the promise of contextual is, yeah, we're not going to know as much about people and their past behaviors, but we're going to know what they're reading, and we're going to know what they're interested in this moment. And I think there's a real possibility there for us to re-envision how we think of psychographics and interests in this contextual world.
That's super interesting. And that's a pretty interesting perspective, because I remember as a buyer in my previous lifetime, like I like to say, how one vendor, one DSP that we were working on were recommended a Peer 39 or IAS contextual targeting, or I mean, those are not the only two. You have Double Verify, you have a lot of partners out there. For those listening, if you don't know where to start, there's a lot of contextual targeting partners, including even something like Zeus, the Zeus technology from the Washington Post. But I remember the DSP specifically recommending excluding to save not only some CPM fees or CPM costs. So let's really talk about the cost. I think it's called what, the tech tax or the tax fee. The tech fee in the industry, in terms of like, oh, we have to add this brand safety, and there's a fee in addition onto the CPM, and then we have to add the verification tool, and then there's a fee, and then there's the data fee, and then there's this fee, and then there's the DSP fee. So how have this been a conversation with any of your clients, any agency partners, anyone, in terms of like, well, we want to test contextual targeting, but it may not be as cost efficient as we want it to be?
I can answer that one. Yeah, that's definitely an ongoing conversation that we have regardless of the channel, honestly, but particularly with programmatic. I think, especially in the B2B space, we're already dealing with a lot of higher costs associated with bidding on a very like niche audience to begin with. So to already have to explain a high CPM that is consistently getting higher is always going to be an issue. So I think really where that comes in is just being really on top of watching the cost cap, doing things like monitoring your frequency and so on to really accommodate any potential questions that you may get asked at the end of the campaign, to allow yourself to better present a success story. And that has so far been what has worked for me.
Okay. That makes a lot of sense, because I like that point, and it's a good segue into one of the question I had, in terms of like, there's a lot of like AI modeling, AI contextual modeling thrown out there in the interweb. There's a lot of partners that I like to say is, we have a proprietary or patent pending AI, and our contextual targeting tool is going to be thebomb.com. What does that really mean, like AI modeling? Can anybody explain that to me? I think I have an idea, but like, what is that? How would you define this, Chris?
Yeah. So what does it mean? Nothing.
Yeah. Okay.
But you know, AI is like, well, we taught a computer to do something, and like, and how well does it do it is really the question you want to be asking. And so, you know, one of my soapboxes is that you need metrics on how well your contextual AI is classifying content. How precise is it when it says that this article is a sports article, or if this article is an automobile article, right? Or an article that is talking about automobiles? How accurate is that, right? Like, how precise is it at saying this is what I say it is? And how much of the universe does it actually get? So does it classify?
Oh, I think we lost Chris. Chris, can you guys hear him actually, or is it just me?
No, I think we lost him.
Okay, that's okay. He was dropping some bombs, some fire bombs though, so I was really hoping to hear the end of it. So to recap what Chris was saying, for anybody joining, I asked the question about AI modeling and contextual targeting and AI. What does that really mean? And he was saying that it's basically it's a term that is thrown out there very often, but we need to make sure to ask the right question with those vendors, like how precise is it? What does it really mean? Why is it called AI contextual targeting versus something else? So he's just dropped, so I'm assuming he'll come up very soon here. So there's a lot going on. So Amanda, from a brand's perspective, and I'm really grateful that I had this panel, because again, I'm always asking like, but I wonder if it's the same on the brand side. Like, I've never worked on the brand side. So let's talk about contextual targeting from an overarching strategy. I know you attended the Programmatic IO a couple of weeks ago. We got to meet. It was really bomb. StackAdapt had a really cool presentation, and they talked about their AI, contextual AI. And I'm not, StackAdapt, if you're listening, please, I'm not throwing shades or I'm not calling you out, because I found it was super interesting how they had case studies and they were showing like graphs about how their AI contextual targeting did much better than something like a retargeting. Is that a strategy that you will be looking at implementing based on their presentation, or even based on that AI modeling?
Yeah, so
Or are you already implementing it? Sorry to cut you off.
No, you're fine. I think from a brand perspective, again, for us, it's really taking a step back. Like, what is our business strategy? What are we trying to accomplish for the brand? There's going to be more than one way to skin the cat, if you know what I mean. So, every trader is going to be different. Every agency is going to be different in their approach, but understanding what the objectives are for each campaign is really what's most important. I think that, again, those are solutions that we certainly want to test. We're not going to throw all of our eggs in one basket and jump on the AI bandwagon with everything all at once, because I do believe in the value of testing and good data to really understand if it's working or not. I do agree that was a really great presentation from StackAdapt, and I'm looking forward to learning more on all of these different capabilities that are out there. I think we just need to be careful when we compare, retargeting in general versus a solution like that without a lot of details behind it, because I think that retargeting is something that, depending on the creative, depending on the frequency capping, depending on the overall strategy and how you go to market with that retargeting message, it can affect performance. So it was just sort of a little bit more general than what I would like to understand if I was going to move forward with that. But again, I think these are all things that we as brands do need to take into consideration, and we do need to be open-minded with the notion that we're going to take baby steps.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, I was looking for my mute button. Didn't want to drink in y'all's ears. So Victoria, what do you think about Amanda's point?
No, I completely agree. Like, I think because this is such a new tactic for so many brands out there, to really expect them to put the same resources behind contextual as they would like for retargeting in this particular instance isn't quite at that point. But, like I mentioned earlier, incrementally testing it, introducing it maybe with smaller budgets than you would normally allocate, finding opportunities to, like, maybe if one particular tactic falls through for performance issues, maybe subbing that in with that remaining budget. Just kind of, I think the key here, especially over the next 6 to 12 months, is really going to be on advertisers to remain flexible to the situation. And to just continually see opportunities to not only test contextual to begin with, if they haven't already been using it, but finding ways to refine it and find meaning in those metrics accordingly.
That's a good point too, and it goes back to what you were saying, Chris. Welcome back. Don't know if you had more to say, but we were really excited when when you paused, and I was like,
I know.
I don't think that's normal. So we would love for you to finish your train of thoughts or your share here.
But it's to Amanda's point. You need to know what's going on under the hood. You need to actually be able to see the articles that are being suggested that your ads run against. You need to be able to actually see under the hood to any contextual solution. You want to know how precise and accurate it is, and you want to test it against your own intuition. I think that's so important. Not all contextual is equal, and just because they use the term AI doesn't mean that it's any better than any other solution. A keyword-based approach could work really well if it's a simple set of words that are going to uniquely identify the content that you want to be alongside. There's no right or wrong answer here, but the most important thing is you need to be able to see what you're at, like what sites you're being suggested to run on. And if you can't see that from the provider you're using, use another provider, because someone's going to be able to show that to you. And that's kind of what I mean by under the hood, is what websites are being positively suggested for my ads, and that's the most important thing. And I just encourage everyone out there considering this to just spend a half hour just looking at that news content that the provider will send you, and just say, is this where I want to be? And if the answer is yes, then contextual is only going to help with everything that you're trying to do. I don't think it's the only way you target ads. I think it's one of the tools in the toolbox. But like I said, programmatic is this huge landscape of billions of impressions a day. It helps you get down to maybe a smaller subset of impressions that actually are really relevant to you. And then beyond that, I think like Amanda said, retargeting and is really, that's never going away. And even if third-party cookies were dead tomorrow, it's still retargeting is going to be around. It should always be a go-to strategy. But contextuals, I think it's a tool in the toolkit,
Yeah. I agree. I mean, there's so much. Like, if we had to recap this conversation, contextual is one of the main thing. And I know y'all knew about this, and listeners and viewers, but you should absolutely be testing contextual targeting in your strategy right now, whether you're using a partner that offer AI modeling or not. The reality is that even though a lot of things are automated, and programmatic media is automation of media buying and ad placement, you still need somebody to look into it. Like you mentioned, I'm going to borrow the term, look under the hood. You want to see what's going on. First of all, you want to know like how things are working. So identify the source. So go back to the source, such as what Chris was mentioning, and actually Amanda, go back to your sources. Who is what? How are they doing? How are they gathering their information? How are they as detailed as possible? Ask from the vendor. If a vendor does not give this information, that's a red flag. I don't know if y'all seen on Instagram that those memes with the red flag. That's a red flag. If you're asking a vendor like about how are you gathering this information, how are you tracking or measuring this or that, and they're like, well, this is what's happening, but it's proprietary, so we can't go into details, I would run very much away from it. First of all, because even if we knew a little bit more from your proprietary technology, we probably cannot steal it because it is probably patent pending. Anyway, so that would be my advice. The last thing I wanted to mention before we go into our closing segment here, because I want to be mindful of everyone's time, is that don't be afraid to test and test and test again and test some more. And what we mean by that is not only testing different contextual ad group or strategy or tactic. Yeah, you want to test contextual targeting, excluding from a contextual base and including. But you want to also test different vendors. Like, make sure you test different vendors and don't put all your eggs into one basket. But if you happen to test a few vendors and one or two are working, then yeah, cool. Continue working with them only, because it's about being cost efficient, but it's also being like effective when it comes to your KPIs and your performance. So remember those things. So let's go into the closing segments. These are fun questions I like to ask. How about we do like a rapid fire type of exercise here. Let's each of us give me like quickly one fun fact about yourself. And Amanda, go.
Oh my gosh. Okay. I used to be a professional dancer.
What? Like what What kind of dancing?
Ballet.
Okay. No, this is so cool. Oh my gosh. How about you, Victoria?
Well, Amanda and I are going to have to put on a joint show because I actually majored in classical opera.
No way.
Yeah.
Okay, you one-upped me on that one.
No, I promise you I didn't, but we can put on a show together if we so chose.
Nice.
That is really interesting. I had no idea. Chris, were you done?
I might put
Are
on the
you
music for that show. I started college as a music major, and I just
All right.
You know what, y'all? I had no idea. The way we came across is that I posted on LinkedIn, and I reached out to some of you, and some of you reached out to me, and some of you were referrals from reaching. So that is super fun. And then last question is, or one last question after that. But what is the latest thing you listen to versus an Audible? What is the last book you've read or you're currently reading? I'm a bookworm, so I love to ask those questions.
I'm reading Smoke It's in Your Eyes by Caitlin Doughty, which is about, it's a little morbid maybe, but it is about death practice around the world. It's really cool though, how people, celebrate that.
Okay. No, it's fine. It's fine.
It's
Chris,
really
are you reading
interesting.
anything? I love it. What are you reading, Chris, or listening to if you're doing audibles?
Yeah, so I have to read for a living with all the research that I do.
Oh,
so
I bet.
it's just like I don't read a ton for fun. But in the academic world, I really like Gladwell's books, but I also like Jonah Berger's Contagious, and so that's one that I always recommend because I think it's a great way to think about viral marketing. And so if you haven't read that one, it's been out for a few years, but if you haven't read it, that'd be my suggestion.
Okay, Contagious from Jonah Berger. And I actually just finished Outliers from Malcolm Gladwell. And that was a really good book. Outliers was really good. Amanda, how about you?
Yeah, so I too don't really read a whole lot for fun. I have 3 small children, so there's not a whole lot of time for that. But as someone who grew up in the arts, grew up in dance, theater, all of that good stuff, I really enjoy reading about people and their lives.
Nice. Me too, memoirs.
Yeah. So I'm actually in the middle of Queen Meryl, which is about Meryl Streep and her life and her work. I think she's one of the greatest actors of all time, and I'm really enjoying that so far.
That is awesome. I'm currently reading Jim Quick, Limitless, and that book is just like, it's very deep. So I've been rereading the same pages over so I could remember some of that. But I'm a big fan of memoirs too. I've read quite a few, but I like the memoirs from like celebrities. Like I read Tiffany Haddish's, Michelle Obama. I read Shonda Rhimes' The Year of Yes, which is not a memoir per se, but she talks a lot about her personal life, of course. So I'm a big fan of memoirs. So let's close this amazing first live panel, yay, with a word of wisdom. What would be one advice you can give to somebody that's looking into maybe adding contextual targeting as a strategy, or just like somebody that works in the industry and don't know where to start? What would be like one word of wisdom for them?
So I can start. I'll say from my perspective, transparency. Again, being in the client seat, that is all we really care about. And to your point, Victoria, earlier on pricing, I think that from an agency or brand, I guess, perspective, if the prices are going up as a client, we just want to understand why, and is it moving the needle? So are we spending more for the impression? That's okay if our return on ad spend is improving. So are we improving performance with our strategies, and are our vendors and agency partners really transparent with us, both from an inventory perspective, but also on a cost perspective and all of those good things. So I think transparency is so important, and it's another hot topic lately, especially as we think about some of the other topics like in-housing and whatnot. So
and we don't get a chance to touch about privacy, but that's a really great point. Transparency. Victoria.
Yeah, no, just kind of going off the theme of the day, but like testing, I would say don't be scared of the learning curve. There will be failures, there will be opportunities for improvement. I think really making sure that you're communicating, and again, Amanda, going back, being very transparent about what's working, what's not working. It'll put you in a position where you can gather as much insight now where things are still kind of forgiving, so that you have that insight for later and you're not kind of in a sink or swim situation.
Perfect. And Chris, last but not least, but how would you end this panel with a word of wisdom?
Yeah, I think contextual advertising is like looking for a house. And I think you have to find the right community that you want your ad to live in, right? We you know, the house is important, the ad is important, but it's really important that you find the community that checks all the right boxes. That can mean, you know, relevance on a topical level, which is like, you know, making sure that, you know, when people are reading content about the best winter weather tires, your ad is right there. But it also can mean making sure that your ad is in an environment that makes sense for your brand. So you know, like it's in making sure you sponsor the journalism that you say you care about as a brand. And I think that's really what contextual is finding that those little communities that you want to live in, and then putting yourself in that conversation.
I absolutely love that analogy, and I will definitely use it again. Thank you
Yeah.
so much, all three of you, for joining. This was thebomb.com. We really appreciate it. If you're listening, this is a live panel podcast, and it will be available on all podcast platforms tomorrow, but it's currently available on LinkedIn and YouTube as we speak. Amanda, Victoria, and Chris, thank you so much for joining us. For those who would like to reach out to them, their information will be in the show notes. And if you're on LinkedIn, there are all tags on all the posts. So feel free to DM them, to ask them questions, to hire them, to work with them, to consult with them. And as always, make it a great day and go live your best life. So thank you everybody for joining, and have a great day.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.